Hello and welcome to Point of View. I'm John Watson. Last week we talked to Federated Farmers President Bruce Wills and heard his concerns around the possibility of a Labour Green coalition government coming into power this year. Today we're joined by Leader of the Opposition, David Cunliffe, to address some of those concerns and ask him what his vision is for our primary industries. Mr Cunliffe, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Great to see you.
What's your vision for our primary industries under a Labour-led government?
Well, it's pretty simple, really. It's an industry which is a high-value industry that's providing prosperity for our farming communities and lots of well-paying jobs for our people, and continues to be underpinning our export economy as the mainstay of New Zealand's production.
What are the main changes you'd like to see or implement should you become our next Prime Minister?
Well, look, let's be clear about the tensions and the long-term trends that are going on in our rural sector at the moment. I'm sure I'm not wanting to teach Granny to suck eggs here, because our farming communities will be well aware of this. If you're a multinational investor in New Zealand, knowing that the world is short of protein, you're going to want to get your hands on it as early in the value chain as you can, for as least money as you can, and then add the value in a production process that you own into customers that you own the relationship with. That's how the foreign marketer maximises their profit. Now flip it around. What we don't want to be is the peasant producers of raw materials seeing our milk powder disappearing down the value chain undifferentiated at low prices. Our whole carcasses being exported for processing overseas, raw logs on the wharf. We want to be adding value in New Zealand, owning as much of the value chain to the customer as we can, and having highly valued, well-trained New Zealanders employed in our rural sector, adding that value and thus earning good livings.
Do you have any ideas of how you're going to achieve that more than a national government has?
Yeah, I think from our point of view, National's taken a very short-term approach. They are focused increasingly on driving volume. And look, at one level you can't blame people for sort of converting to dairy and putting as many cows on as you can when prices are high. That's the market working as you'd expect it to, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in behind that, we need a government which has got experience in business, experience in the rural sector as we do, which can bring the very best of scientific development and engagement, upskill our rural workforce, bring that good science and that skill base to bear with a good strategic plan which says we want to get as much value as we can out of every cow we milk, out of every carcass we kill, out of every wool clip we shear. Those things are essential, and of course there's the broader agenda, horticulture, viticulture, and of course rural tourism, which are all absolutely important parts of the picture. I come back again, the key difference: national short-term, Labour long-term. National pushing volume, Labour saying it's about more than the number of cows we milk, it's about the number of dollars we get out of every litre of milk.
How much of the farmer vote do you realistically expect to get in the upcoming election?
A good slice of it. I've taken the regional development portfolio and I'm working very closely with the Honourable Damien O'Connor, our primary industries spokesperson, and I'm going to be up and down the country in rural communities throughout the year. I think a lot of farmers know that while dairy prices are at a pretty close to all-time high at the moment, and while we've got lots of insurance money to spend from Christchurch, so in the short term the outlook looks a little bit deceptively rosy, that the long-term problems haven't been fixed and in many cases are getting worse. And what we need is an integrated strategy for economic development which adds more value in New Zealand and provides more high-value New Zealand jobs and wages, and of course better incomes for farmers down the track.
Why do you think historically farmers have voted for National rather than Labour?
Well, I don't think you can make that assumption. I know plenty of farmers that have voted for Labour. Okay, National holds most of the rural seats at the moment, but there's a lot of provincial centres which blend country towns and farms that have been Labour in the past, and there's certainly a good number that we expect to come back to us on the rising tide this year.
You dropped the agriculture portfolio down the list to, I think it's 19.
It's a cabinet level portfolio. It will always be a cabinet level portfolio, and Damien O'Connor is doing a good job. In the particular reshuffle that we did last year, to be really frank and open with you, there is two-way traffic of young up-and-comers moving up, and some of the senior members who've been very senior in previous years moving through different stages of their career, and there is temporary adjustment in the middle.
Because I suppose it could be construed that you view agriculture as less important than perhaps previous leaders.
That is absolutely not true. I would not have taken the rural development portfolio, the regional development portfolio myself, if I didn't passionately care about the health of our regions. So I absolutely reject the suggestion that there's been any demotion of primary industries within our rankings. It remains absolutely crucial to our broader economic strategy.
Okay, let me get your reaction to some concerns federated farmers have. First, they say that your policies are quite a change from what we have at the moment, and that they haven't seen such a stark difference in policy between Labour and National in a long time.
Thank God for that. You know, there's a red team and there's a blue team. Red is the accelerator pedal, blue is the brake pedal. It's time New Zealand got going, and it's time we had an integrated development strategy for rural and regional New Zealand that created more high value jobs for New Zealanders, and that is what Labour stands for. It means more prosperity for our farmers too, because we're going to be working with them to support them to add more value to everything we produce.
But your policies would suggest farmers would be less prosperous under Labour than National due to the increased taxes and expenses.
I doubt it. At the moment we have a bizarre situation, if you think about it, when New Zealand is one of only 3 countries in the developed world that does not have any tax whatsoever on capital gain. That is a completely ridiculous and unsustainable position, and we make no apologies for the fact that we want a modern tax system which keeps rates reasonably low but broadens the tax base to include capital gain as well as profit. Now, in what that means, if I can take it to the next step, is that it will make it more sensible for farmers to be farming for profitability, not just banking it and leveraging up by putting debt on their 3rd and 4th dairy farm, right? Mm-hmm. That in turn will help the sector become more productive by allowing investment capital to flow where it can do the most good, which is in things that enhance productivity and enhance profitability for our farms.
Okay, I'll go through the concerns around the capital gains tax. The first is that if it's not across the board, it will simply create loopholes for accountants and lawyers to jump through.
I think it is across the board.
Would there be any exemptions under the capital gain tax?
Well, we're not going to tax the home or the home paddock, because farmers are entitled to their own home being tax-free on capital gain the same way that townies are, right? We're not going to penalise the farmers relative to the townies there, and the reason is people need a home to live in, it's not an investment. So the house and the home paddock will not be taxed, and remember, there is nothing retrospective about this. We'll set this from a future date. Any capital gain up to that point remains tax-free, and it's a low flat rate of 15% only when realised. So it's only if you dispose of an asset do you then pay capital gains, and then only 15% on the actual profit. So you'll never be in the situation where you're having to reach into your balance sheet and pull cash out to pay the tax man.
The other concern is around farm succession. If you have children growing up working on the farms and the understanding that they'll one day take it over, and then they have to stump up 15% to do so, that's going to put them off.
No, not actually true. We made the rather kindly decision to be flexible on that matter and not to automatically crystallise capital gains on death, all right? So there would be a level of case-by-case analysis to see when it is truly the case that an asset has changed hands, and it may be that succession within a family farming arrangement would qualify for grandparenting of that capital gain.
Okay, because farm succession most often happens prior to death, so will that be taken into consideration? Will there be a possibility that they won't have to pay capital gains tax?
Yeah, what we've said is that we'll set up an expert advisory group that will work through those details, but it's a case by case rather than an automatic crystallisation at death. So, I mean, people have probably got themselves a bit more worried about that issue than they need to. It's probably going to be a bit more flexible than people think.
So can you say, in the case of farm succession, chances are they won't have to pay capital gains tax?
It's case by case. The expert advisory group has not yet written the fine print rules because we can't set that up until we're elected. In general, if the ownership structure of a farm remains intact, it is quite possible that the capital gains tax does not crystallise, right? Depending on the arrangements on the particular case. Those rules need to be written in detail, and then of course they would need to be analysed and applied by the legal and the farm accounting committee.
Let's tackle the emissions trading scheme now. Why should we be the only country in the world to tax the ruminating stomach?
Because 54% of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions are from our primary sector, for the very reason that our primary sector is such an important part of our economy. So let's be fair about this. We can't have it both ways. We can't say farming's the backbone of New Zealand and New Zealand's policies need to be written around the need to maintain our export base on the one hand, and then not pay a share of the tab, which will be very gentle when it comes to managing our carbon footprint. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's a lot of upside in having an indicative price on carbon. For example, farm forestry would become far and away more profitable if there was a price on carbon, because it's a carbon sink and the farmer gets a check.
Okay, so there will be credits for planting trees under your policy, because under Helen Clark's policy there wasn't.
Yeah, we are looking to put a price on carbon as part of an ETS, and the plan there is that all carbon sinks get a fair allowance for the value of the carbon that they sequester. Now there's another area of this which is even more exciting for farmers, where the policy still needs a bit more development. Let's say we take soil carbon development seriously, and let's say we can demonstrate how much carbon farmers can sequester through modern, more organic farming practices that sequester carbon into soil. Farmers would collect a cheque for doing that, because they would be taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into the ground where it helps grow better crops. Now that's a win-win as well. You get a better, more sustainable feedstock, and you get a bonus for taking the carbon out of the air. So look, the details still require work in some places, but the point I'm trying to get across is, why would we assume that this is all bad news? What we're trying to do is match the price signals to the long-term direction of travel of the economy.
Do you have any idea yet what the numbers will be?
Carbon price hasn't yet been set. That'd be for the future, and therefore it's very difficult to wind that through. At the moment, the international carbon price is very, very low, because the post-Kyoto Protocol negotiations have fallen through. So as of today's international carbon price, the cost would be absolutely minimal.
Less than what Helen Clark's policy was?
Much. That was set off $25 a tonne, and the current price is much lower than that. Now it may be that we have to fix a domestic price to avoid the oscillations of the international cycle, and that is a decision that we haven't finally taken yet.
What about this theory though? We're one of the most efficient farming nations in the world, so if you were to introduce this tax, it would transfer the production elsewhere where they're less efficient, hence it's more detrimental for the environment.
Let's think carefully about the way that you're using, respectfully, the word efficiency. What I think you're meaning is it's efficient because it's low cost production. Now if you go to a British supermarket chain like Waitrose or Sainsbury's or Tesco, they don't always buy the absolute cheapest that they can buy. They buy the stuff that they think they can sell most profitably to their customers. So they increasingly want traceability, they often want organics, there are some sprays they won't allow to be used, and they want really high standards of biosecurity on the way up their production chain.
Well, let's swap efficient in that case for environmentally friendly. We're up there in terms of environmentally friendly farming, so if you bring in this tax, it would lessen production, which means it would be transferred to another country.
Well, last time I looked, it's pretty hard to bulldoze land to someone else's country. We have some of the most beautiful and productive pasture in the world, and that is ours by birthright, and it's ours to keep, and it's ours to steward, and it's ours to make more productive going forward. So we get both goals: a lovely land that we can pass on to our children and grandchildren, and a good living on the way through. That's what we want: opportunity for all, sustainable environment. You're right, we have some wonderful environmental practices, and I give credit to organisations like Fonterra who are taking that increasingly seriously. But the world is also expecting more and more. Imagine that we hadn't had a publicly funded livestock improvement corporation doing traceability work for the dairy industry from a decade ago. And now the world says we want traceability on your products. It was a public sector investment that gave us the capability, ultimately, to be able to deliver on that, and that's keeping our prices up in foreign markets as we speak. So again, let's not just think lowest cost, let's think high quality, sustainability and profitability, which is price minus cost.
Speaking of which, there's a research development program in Palmerston North in which they've found some cows in a herd produce up to 30% less methane than others. Do you think it would be a good idea to invest and spend money on R&D into science and more efficient and environmentally friendly farming practices than to tax?
Completely agree. And look, one of the key platforms of our policy, our election campaign, is to see New Zealand invest more in R&D, and that will include the rural sector. Now, I want to give credit to New Zealand's primary industries. Close to 60% of all of the R&D that's going on in New Zealand is going on in the primary sector right now, 57%. And so it is wrong for people to say primary sector is dumb, manufacturing smart, because a lot of our best brains are focused on our primary industries, and that should and no doubt will continue. I really like some of the work that Sir Paul Callaghan, the late Sir Paul Callaghan, and Paul Hendy did, their book From Wool to Weta, which is saying we can add value and add smarts both in our primary sector and in our new smart industries. We have to do both because we've got jobs in the rural communities and jobs in the cities, not an either or.
How much importance do you place on water storage? Because there are fears that if a Labour Green Coalition government comes into power this year, these water storage projects that we've started to embark on will come to a screeching halt.
Well, look, I don't know who's been priming you with all this phooey, but it is frankly not worth the paper it's written on. Labour is absolutely committed to increasing the amount of water storage and water management that goes on in New Zealand, and it actually flows from the previous question about climate change. We're taking that a whole lot more seriously than the National Party, right? National's got their head in their sand and their bum up in the breeze. They pulled us out of the successor negotiations to Kyoto, and God knows what sort of treaty somebody else is going to write. We ought to be at the table, so the rules suit us. The rules around agriculture, for example, what gets covered, what doesn't. The rules around forest sinks. And as part of that acknowledgement of the importance of climate change, absolutely, we want to make sure that we've got better water management and storage. Now, we don't want that to be a tax on the rural sector. We want appropriate public investment into public water storage infrastructure, and we also want the price mechanism around the use of water to support the development of good sustainable water management practices.
Speaking of water, the resource rentals policy is another aspect of concern to federated farmers.
I don't know why it would be an aspect of concern, because if you want water storage facilities, somebody's got to pay for them. Here's my commitment to you. Labour will never use water levies or water storage charges as a disguised general tax. What we will look for is responsible price signals around the use of water which contribute fiscally neutrally to the development of water management and storage. Okay? So look, if a cow turns water into milk, it needs water, right? Water is a very valuable input to that product. It is absolutely reasonable that there should be a reasonable rental charge for that water, such that it is sufficient to ensure the development of good irrigation and water storage facilities that enable that industry to develop. That is actually just using the market responsibly.
A final concern, Mr Cunliffe, is the position on the political spectrum that your Labour Green coalition government would hold. If you were to come into power, how much say would the Green Party have on your agricultural policies?
Well, look, I'm here to advocate for the Labour vote. I'm certainly not here to criticise our Green colleagues. But for those who recognise that as of today there is a very good chance that there will be a change of government, they face themselves a question. Who are you going to vote for? I think most farming folk understand that if they have a good, strong Labour core to the next Labour-led government, its policies will be both economically as well as environmentally sustainable, and that we are pragmatic, in touch with rural communities, that we are well led in that sector through people like Damien O'Connor, and that we want to get alongside the sector and partner with it on that journey towards higher value and better jobs and incomes in New Zealand. And I think most people would welcome that. You get that, given that there may well be a change of government, by voting Labour with your party vote.
Can you understand how farmers would be concerned about the possibility of a Labour Green coalition coming into power in this upcoming election?
Look, as I said, it's not my job to knock our Green friends, but farmers, like every other New Zealander, if they want stability and economic prudence as part of the next government, and if they think there's a reasonable chance the government will change, have a logical incentive to vote Labour on that basis.
Will you be keeping Damien O'Connor as Primary Industries Minister?
I very much expect so. I think he's doing a very good job in that area, and he certainly has my confidence.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would like to just reflect on the line of questions, if I might be so bold. I enjoy the relationship which I personally have with the senior figures in Federated Farmers. I think it's a great outfit and I have a lot of respect for them. But most of the questions that you've asked me today have started with a negative proposition, that somehow a Labour-led government would be quite bad for farmers. And I guess my key message to you and your viewers is that those propositions are wrong, that actually Labour creates a lot of opportunities for the rural sector. And why do I care? Why have I taken the regional development portfolio? Because I grew up in regional New Zealand. Unlike John Key, I've worked in a shearing gang. Unlike John Key, I've worked on a cropping farm. I've driven a tractor, not always well, and I can't say my shearing was of a very high standard either. But mate, I've been there, and I know that the backbone of New Zealand's export industry comes from the primary sectors. I just want to make sure with my team that we're getting the best out of it both today and in the future, and that means investment in the smart stuff that supports the green stuff, and it means planning ahead to make sure that we don't get hit across the chops by things like climate change and water shortages, and that we're planning ahead so that the adjustment path is well. And let me just finish on this. The government's performance in the area of biosecurity has been woeful, and Labour is looking very seriously at the idea of an independent biosecurity agency which would strengthen biosecurity standards and see us very much at the world forefront of protecting our farmers and their incomes from incursions like foot and mouth. I think that's a very important step forward. We also want to be partnering with industries like the meat industry and the wool industry, both of whom have huge structural problems in the face of a very high exchange rate, and we want to work closely with them to find solutions for their industries. Now, why do we have a democratic system? Because after a while, all governments get tired. Now, I'm not going to say everything National's done has been bad. It hasn't, and they've got people of good intent working there too. But what I do believe is that the time has come for fresh ideas, a fresh team that can work with some of those difficult long-term issues and make a real long-term difference.
Mr Cunliffe, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's Point of View for this week. I'm John Watson. Thank you to my guest, David Cunliffe, and thank you to you at home for watching.